Today on Cinema and Cocktails, part one of a two-part Halloween special. I just want to make sure you all have some good viewing options in case you decide to stay at home and not go out to any of those Halloween parties. The first film, entitled Sinister, follows a struggling writer looking for new material and gets a little bit more than what he bargained for. The second, It Follows, gives a whole new meaning to the acronym STD. Both can be found on the Peacock App via your cable provider. Drinks will be needed when you watch these movies, so let's watch them, mix them, and drink them. So, if you bought a house, or if you had a chance to buy a house that was like relatively cheap, like really, really below market value, but then you found out that a bunch of murders happened in that house, would you still go through with the sale? I mean, it's a beautiful home. It's just like below market value because of all the death that occurred inside that house. I don't know. It's a tough situation, but that's where our film kind of begins in Sinister, when our washed up true crime writer Ellison Oswald moves into a home where something grisly happened a while back. And while he's in there, he comes across these like Super 8 home movies, those old school grainy movies. And the films kind of suggest that something happened there way back in the 1960s. It could possibly be the work of a potential serial killer. And that is basically the premise for the film Sinister, starring Ethan Hawke. Now, Ethan Hawke has a very solid 84 acting credits to his resume, beginning way back in the day when he was in Dead Poets Society. He was also in Reality Bites. He played opposite Julie Delpy in the Before series. I think I've talked about these before. Before Sunrise, Before Midnight, Before Sunset, Before Dinner, Before Breakfast, whatever. I was kind of late to the Ethan Hawke party. I didn't really notice him until I saw him in Gattaca. And that was when he was opposite Uma Thurman. He was absolutely fantastic in Training Day. He was really kind of unseemingly in this movie called Tape. He was also in Uma Thurman with that. I don't know if anybody ever saw Tape, but it was kind of like this independent film where it was him and Uma and I forget the other actor's name, but they were like in like this hotel room, and they were kind of going over something that really bad happened back when they were in high school. It's kind of a cringy movie. He was great in the remake of Assault on Precinct 13. He was in Lord of War. He was wonderfully stressed out in Brooklyn's Finest. And he also played two relatively detached roles. He was in this movie called Good Kill, where he was one of those kind of people that I guess does like the drone bombings. And then he played this other guy. He played like a priest in First Reformed. And that was weird. He was just kind of like this, I don't know if he was depressed or something or whatever, but he was just kind of sitting around the parish drinking and just couldn't get his life together. Man, he put on a fantastic performance. And Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, opposite Philip Seymour Hoffman. And of course, he was the dad in The Purge, which I think everybody's going to watch about 30 times this weekend coming up. And he was also most recently in a movie called What Doesn't Kill You. But, overall, I think Ethan has had a very, very solid career. I think he's one of the more better character actors we have in Hollywood. And he has some definite range, but he's really good at playing actors who get stressed out. That's where I think he is really, really strong. And he shows a little bit of that in this movie as this writer who's trying to get this hit book out because he just can't seem to get a hit out anymore. And, you'll find out why. Juliet Raylands is a British actress. She's got a modest 17 acting credits to her name. Most notably was in 2012. She was in a film called Frances Ha, independent film about some woman in New York who can't get her life together. She has been on a TV series called The Nick. She was also in American Gothic. And she also played, and she's also recently been involved with the Perry Mason reboot series as Della Street. So she's pretty good. Last but not least is James Ranson. He unfortunately plays a character just known as the Deputy. I completely forgot about him on Inside Man. He was great in Generation Kill. He also made an appearance in It, Chapter 2, as one of the grown-ups, I believe he was. But for me, James Ranson will always be remembered as Chester Ziggy Sabatka. Yes, Ziggy is in this movie. For those of you that are big-time Wire fans, the Deputy is played by Ziggy. So it's kind of cool seeing him in a different type of setting. Also, who kind of chimed in with, I don't think he got a credit for this movie, but is our old buddy Vincent D'Onofrio, a.k.a. Private Pile. But this time he doesn't play a pile role or even an Italian mobster. He kind of plays a professor. And so he's a very, kind of an intelligent role in this one. But it's a small part, but it was good seeing him in there. It's definitely seeing him in there. Now, as far as the main characters in this movie, I'm not going to get into all of them. I'm just going to focus on the main guy, which was Ellison. And to be honest with you, there really wasn't a lot of depth to his character. I mean, except that you learn about some of the more unscrupulous methods through which he gets his stories for his novels. He's essentially an ambulance chaser. And so when he finds out something that's really bad that's happened, he moves his family around from city to city to investigate the story, and then he writes the novel about it. So in this situation, the story focuses around Ellison and his need to write another hit book. And his approach is similar, but this time he seems to have come across a murder story that might be just a little bit too much for him to handle. His arc essentially is not very complex. I mean, he pretends to be a tough guy, unafraid of his work, but as the movie continues on, he slowly begins to unravel and actually becomes somewhat remorseful in regards to, what he has done to his family this time around. The other characters, they just kind of orbit around his story. Tracy, his wife, she plays, the typical usual, I won't say typical usual wife in a horror story, but, she plays like, the wife's role. Things are going bad. She wants to move and get the hell out of there. All right. And Ranson plays the deputy. Ranson as a deputy. It's interesting because it seems like he's trying to help, but I'm not quite sure, how his character was written. It's almost as if he's a red herring as far as characters go. Now, the dialogue I thought was very smart, very snappy. The story unfolds like a murder mystery, and the dialogue helps to keep telling the story. None of the lines really seem forced. I didn't find myself hearing conversations that kind of seem formulaic for a horror film. I know sometimes horror movies will have these kind of scenarios or weird conversations that are designed to push the plot along, whether it's this strange investigative line of questioning that just seems completely out of place. Like the guy goes to a donut shop and then starts asking questions about the house over on Elm Street. That probably wouldn't really happen in real life, but that's the way the conversations go sometimes. Other than that, nothing else really happens, in that regard until you see Ellison talk to Professor Jones, and then you get some exposition. But most of the conversations seem to be very natural. None of it really seems to be contrived. Now, at its core, what exactly is this story about? Well, it's kind of got a couple of conflicts going on. The first of which is obviously human versus, I guess you could say the supernatural or the unknown. You're trying to figure out who exactly or what exactly this serial killer is, but he's definitely a force of nature that needs to be dealt with. The other conflict I thought was kind of human versus human, because Ellison is in constant conflict with his wife. She doesn't want to live there. The kids didn't want to move there. The police officers in the town don't want him there. So it's kind of like him versus the world, and it's kind of him versus this being he's having to deal with, who's behind all the horribleness that's occurred inside that house. Now, the plot type I thought is very basic. It's just basically a guy with a problem, a guy with a major problem. Somehow or another, he has awakened something and he just can't seem to shake it. Now, whatever it is, it seems very malevolent for reasons unknown. And Ellison is involved in trying to solve this mystery. You could also add in potentially a why done it, because we know who it is and we know what they do. But the question is, why do they keep doing it? Like, what is the purpose? Like, anytime you have a serial killer, you always want to know what their motivation is. Thematically, I really can't give you the theme in this one, because if I gave you the theme, it would kind of give away what the movie's really about. So I'll let you watch it and come up with your own, premise for a theme on your own. Now, the structure of the film I thought was wonderfully done. It follows your great, 3 to 4 act structure. It's very, very well balanced. In the first act, you see them kind of move into the house, and you see as he discovers the snuff film, you break into the second act. About midway through the film, he really starts investigating all the things that are happening to him inside the house. And then last but not least, in the third act, you discover the true nature of the events that have unfolded. So it flows relatively smooth. There's nothing really horribly unbalanced, and that is due to the wonderful job of the direction of Scott Derrickson. This guy seems to be a master of horror. Okay, he was behind The Exorcism of Emily Rose. He was involved in Devil's Knot. He was involved in Hellraiser Inferno, and he was also behind Doctor Strange. So it's kind of like he's got these horror movies, and all of a sudden, bing, he's got this superhero movie out there. But all of them seem to deal with things that are revolving around the supernatural. Now, what Derrickson really excelled at in this movie is that he really sets the mood with this whole found footage aspect. If you scare easily or are uncomfortable with things that go bump in the night or go bump in the dark, this movie's going to grab a hold of you, because he makes you constantly feel uneasy by shooting a lot of these scenes. Not shooting the scenes, but you see a lot of the scenes from a point of view where you're like behind the camera, and all you really see is the flashlight in front of you. I mean, you can barely see what's in front of you. You can barely see anything for a good chunk of the movie because so much of it is in darkness. Most of the action, predictably, does take place at night, so when nightfall comes, you know something bad's going to happen. And the found footage does kind of provide clues to the mystery and is used very, very well. The camera angles and the lighting make things a little frustrating at times. I mean, there are moments where I'm sitting here looking at the screen, I'm like, I can't really see what's going on, but it does set the stage for some very, very frightful events. What worked in this movie was the point of view cinematography. Very uncomfortable imagery of death scenes, and you find yourself almost like talking to the screens, wishing you didn't have to see what was about to happen. What didn't work for me in this movie was I don't really know how many people really believe the story that's presented. I mean, there are times where I'm not quite sure what this movie wants to be. Is it found footage? Is it about ghosts? Is it about possession? Is it about serial killers? I mean, this really could have been a really truly terrifying story with a few more elements and some potential plot twists. It is rated R, and that's because there are some on-screen deaths, and there is some very macabre imagery of death and of horror. And that lends itself to the whole, the Aristotle index in regards to the likely impossibility. What makes a horror film really, really good is the likely impossibility of demons and ghosts and ghouls and possessions and serial killers and just overall weird stuff happening. And this movie does a really decent job of helping you suspend your disbelief. IMDb gave it a very solid 6.8. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 63%, and the audience score was hovering around 61. Now, me personally, I think that audience score is kind of low because I think, like I told you, there were moments when you're watching the movie where it was kind of hard to enjoy it because some of it was shot in such a dark manner. Like, this movie is meant for you to watch in the dark. If you turn the lights on, you're not going to be able to see much. So it's meant for you to be watching in the dark. As far as my rating goes, I gave it a solid 3.5 out of 4. I mean, I loved Ethan. He's one of my favorite actors. Like I said, he gets distressed as the movie goes along, and that's when I think he's at his best. And Sinister, I mean, it's just, I couldn't give it an excellent rating, but I definitely make it a good suggestion if you want to watch something in the dark and have a few jump scares. Now, it runs at a smooth 1 hour and 49 minutes, not too long, not too short. And even though the plot hangs on typical movie ideas that are within the genre, Sinister does deliver some new twists and new ideas with enough skill to compose a story that is capable of engaging and holding your attention all the way until the end. Who doesn't like lemonade, right? I mean, it's lemonade. Lemonade, that cool, refreshing drink. for those of you that are old school Eddie Murphy fans, you know exactly where I pulled that from. So, you know I know I don't sound as good as Eddie, but I gave